only a few aircraft are authorized to display registration markings of at least 3 inches. Note that this regulation sits directly on the vertical line in Figure 2.5, indicating that it applies to both original and recurrent airworthiness. 14 CFR Part 47 Aircraft Registration. This regulation provides the requirements for registering aircraft. It includes procedures for both owner and dealer registration of aircraft. 14 CFR Part 65 Certification, Airmen other than flight crew members. Pilots, flight instructors, and ground instructors are certificated under 14 CFR Part 61. Flight crew other than pilots are certificated under 14 CFR Part 63. However, many other people are also required to be certificated by the FAA for the U.S. aviation fleet to operate smoothly and efficiently. Title 14 CFR Part 65 addresses many of those other people. 1. Subpart B Air Traffic Control Tower Operators. 2. Subpart C Aircraft Dispatchers. 3. Subpart D Mechanics. 4. Subpart E Repairmen. 5. Subpart F Parachute Riggers. A more detailed discussion of this chapter with a special emphasis on mechanics is included in Chapter 15, the Mechanic Certificate. Note: SFAR 100-2. Relief for U.S. military and civilian personnel who are assigned outside the United States in support of U.S. Armed Forces operations is a good example of the specific nature and limited timeframe that are part of an SFAR. 14 CFR Part 91 General Operating and Flight Rules. This is the final regulation of the 3 major regulations identified earlier in this chapter. Note its interaction in Figure 2.6. with other regulations visually indicating its operational involvement or recurrent airworthiness. Although it is an operational regulation that is focused toward the owner, operator, and/or pilot of the aircraft, the maintenance technician must have an awareness of this regulation. 2 examples of these maintenance-related issues are: 1. Section 91.207 Emergency Locator Transmitters Paragraph C. 2. Battery replacement interval and requirement for a logbook entry indicating the expiration date of the new battery. 2. Section 91.213 Inoperative Instruments and Equipment Paragraph A. 2. A letter of authorization from the FSDO authorizing the operation of the aircraft under a minimum equipment list, MEL, constitutes a STC and must be carried in the aircraft during flight. Subpart E Maintenance, Preventive Maintenance, and Alterations, Sections 91.401 through 91.421. This is the section of most interest to the technician. They must be familiar with it, because it does carry some indirect responsibility for the technician. Note that the 14 CFR Part 91 icon in Figure 2.6 has a direct line to 14 CFR Part 43. This is because Section 91.403b states, no person may perform maintenance, preventive maintenance, or alterations on an aircraft other than is prescribed in this subpart and other applicable regulations, including Part 43 of this chapter. A more complete discussion of this regulation, especially Subpart E maintenance, preventive maintenance, and alterations is presented later in this chapter. 14 CFR Part 119 Certification, Air Carriers and Commercial Operators. In order to better understand the next 3 regulations discussed here, 14 CFR Parts 121, 125, and 135, a brief overview of 14 CFR Part 119 is beneficial. Figure 2.8. There are more than 50 advisory circulars, ACs, in the 120 series alone providing additional non-regulatory information concerning the variety of procedures involved with these operations. There are basically 3 different criteria that must be analyzed in order to properly determine the regulation that applies. These are: 1. Is the service provided for private carriage or common carriage? 2. Is the aircraft for hire or is it not for hire? 3. Is it a large or small aircraft? AC 120-12, as revised, provides the following definition regarding this criterion: A carrier becomes a common carrier when it holds itself out to the public or to a segment of the public as willing to furnish transportation within the limits of its facilities to any person who wants it. There are 4 elements in defining a common carrier. 1. A holding out of a willingness to. 2. Transport persons or property. 3. From place to place. 4. For compensation. End of page 2 to 10. This holding out that makes a person a common carrier can be done in many ways, and it does not matter how it is done. Signs and advertising are the most direct means of holding out, but are not the only ones. Carriage for hire which does not involve holding out is private carriage. Private carriers for hire are sometimes called contract carriers, but the term is borrowed from the Interstate Commerce Act and legally inaccurate when used in connection with the Federal Aviation Act. Private carriage for hire is carriage for one or several selected customers, generally on a long-term basis. The number of contracts must not be too great, otherwise, it implies a willingness to make a contract with anybody. A carrier operating pursuant to 18 to 24 contracts has been held to be a common carrier, because it held itself out to serve the public generally to the extent of its facilities. Private carriage has been found in cases where 3 contracts have been the sole basis of the operator's business. Operations that constitute common carriage are required to be conducted under 14 CFR Part 121 or 135. Private carriage may be conducted under 14 CFR Part 91 or 125. The term for hire is not defined in any of the FAA documents but is generally understood to mean that compensation for both direct and indirect expenses associated with the flight, as well as a profit margin for the operator, are collected from the person or persons benefiting from the flight operation. The determination of whether the aircraft is large or small is based upon the definition provided in 14 CFR Part 1. If the aircraft has maximum certificated takeoff weight of 12,500 pounds or more, it is a large aircraft. All aircraft less than 12,500 maximum certificated takeoff weight are considered to be small aircraft. It may also help the reader understand when 14 CFR Parts 121, 125, and 135 regulations apply, by taking a brief look at a list of flight operations where 14 CFR Part 119 does not apply. 1. Student instruction. 2. Nonstop sightseeing flights with less than 30 seats and less than 25 nautical miles (nm) from the departure airport. 3. Ferry or training flights. 4. Crop dusting or other agricultural operations. 5. Banner towing. 6. Aerial photography or surveying. 7. Firefighting. 8. Power line or pipeline patrol. 9. Parachute operations on non-stop flights within 25 nm from the departure airport. 10. Fractional ownership in accordance with 14 CFR Part 91, Subpart K. 14 CFR Part 121 Operating Requirements, Domestic, Flag, and Supplemental Operations. Title 14 CFR Part 121 establishes the operational rules for air carriers flying for compensation or hire. A domestic operation is any scheduled operation within the 48 contiguous states, the District of Columbia, or any territory or possession, conducted with either a turbojet aircraft, an airplane having 10 or more passenger seats, or a payload capacity greater than 7,500 pounds. A flag operation means any scheduled operation, operating in Alaska or Hawaii to any point outside of those states, or to any territory or possession of the United States, or from any point outside the United States to any point outside the United States, conducted with either a turbojet aircraft, an airplane having 10 or more passenger seats, or a payload capacity greater than 7,500 pounds. Supplemental operation means any common carriage operation conducted with airplanes having more than 30 passenger seats. If less than 30, the airplane must also be listed on the operation specifications of domestic and flag carriers, with a payload capacity of more than 7,500 pounds. Part 121 operators are required by 14 CFR Part 119 to have the following personnel. 1. Director of Safety. End of page 2 to 11. 2. Director of Operations. 3. Director of Maintenance. 4. Chief Pilot. 5. Chief Inspector. There are 28 subparts and 16 appendices in this regulation. However, only subparts J and L are of concern for the mechanic. Subpart J Maintenance, Preventive Maintenance, and Alterations identifies special airworthiness requirements that deals with many of the mechanical aspects of a passenger or cargo aircraft. Subpart L Maintenance, Preventive Maintenance, and Alterations requires that a Part 121 operator have an operational manual that contains the following information. 1. Organizational chart. 2. List of individuals who may perform required inspections. 3. Company maintenance, preventive maintenance, or alterations. 4. A system to both preserve and retrieve maintenance and inspection related information. Also, 14 CFR Part 121, Section 121.1105 establishes the requirement for conducting inspections on aging aircraft. 14 CFR Part 125, Certification and Operations, airplanes having a seating capacity of 20 or more passengers or a maximum payload capacity of 6,000 pounds or more, and rules governing persons on board such aircraft. This regulation applies to private and non-common carriage when such operations are conducted in airplanes having 20 or more seats, excluding crew members, or having a payload capacity of 6,000 pounds or more. There must also be operations specifications issued to the operator that include the following information. 1. Kinds of operations authorized. 2. Types of aircraft and registration numbers of the airplanes authorized for use. 3. Approval of the provisions of the operator's manual relating to airplane inspections, together with the necessary conditions and limitations. 4. Registration numbers of the airplanes that are to be inspected under an approved airplane inspection program, AAIP, under 14 CFR Part 125, Section 125.247. 5. Procedures for the control of weight and balance of airplanes. 6. Any other item that the administrator determines is necessary. Just as in 14 CFR Part 121, Subpart E identifies special airworthiness requirements dealing mostly with the mechanical devices of the aircraft. 14 CFR Part 135 Operating Requirements, Commuter and on-demand operations and rules governing persons on board such aircraft. As the title of this section states, this regulation is applicable to short-distance commercial aircraft operations or commuters and non-scheduled carriers that operate on demand. These aircraft are frequently referred to as air taxi or air charter aircraft. Aircraft operated under 14 CFR Part 135 must be operated and maintained in accordance with the certificate holder's operations manual. This manual, when accepted by the FAA, specifies how the flight crew, ground personnel, and maintenance technicians conduct their operations. A pivotal portion of this regulation is the first section in Subpart J, 14 CFR Part 135, Section 135.411, Application. This section specifies that having a type-certificated passenger seating configuration of 9 or less may be maintained in accordance with the maintenance manual provided by the aircraft manufacturer. Those aircraft having a type-certificated passenger seating configuration of 10 or more seats must be maintained in accordance with a maintenance manual written by the air carrier and must then be submitted to the FAA for approval. The requirements for the maintenance manual are specified in 14 CFR Part 135, Section 135.427. 14 CFR Part 135, Sections 135.415 through 135.417 and 135.423 through 135.443 specify additional maintenance requirements. 14 CFR Part 135, Sections 135.415 and 135.417 are applicable regardless of the number of seats in the aircraft. A major change in the 9 or less aircraft maintenance requirements occurred in February of 2005 when Section 135.422, Aging Aircraft, was incorporated into 14 CFR Part 135. This new subpart, note the even number, to 14 CFR 135 specifically prohibits a certificate holder from operating certain aircraft unless the administrator has completed the aging aircraft inspection and records review. This inspection requires the certificate holder to show the FAA that the maintenance of age-sensitive parts and components has been adequate to ensure safety. This section only applies to multi-engine aircraft in scheduled operation with 9 or fewer passenger seats. It does not apply to aircraft operating in Alaska. The required record review start date varies depending on the age of the aircraft. End of page 2 to 12. However, once initiated, the repetitive inspection intervals are not to exceed 7 years. The certificate holder must make both the aircraft and the records available to the FAA for inspection and review. The certificate holder must notify the administrator at least 60 days in advance of the availability of the aircraft and the records for review. The records must include the following information: 1. Total years in service of the airplane. 2. Total time in service of the airframe. 3. Date of the last inspection and records review required by this section. 4. Current status of life-limited parts. 5. Time since the last overhaul of all structural components required to be overhauled on a specific time basis. 6. Current inspection status of the airplane, including the time since the last inspection required by the inspection program that the airplane is maintained under. 7. Current status of applicable ADs, including the date and methods of compliance, and, if the AD involves recurring action, the time and date when the next action is required. 8. A list of major structural alterations. 9. A report of major structural repairs and the current inspection status of those repairs. 14 CFR Part 145 Repair Stations. This regulation underwent a major rewrite released in 2004 and was the most comprehensive change in nearly 20 years. It may be of interest to note an airframe and power plant (NP) certificate is not necessary to be employed at a repair station. The repair station may also employ both repairmen, under 14 CFR Part 65, Subpart E, and non-FAA certificated personnel. All work that is signed off is done so using the repair station certificate number and must be done only by persons authorized by 14 CFR Part 65 to approve an article for return to service, RTS. Just as other certificate holders must have an operations manual, the repair station must have a repair station manual that contains the following: 1. An organizational chart. 2. Procedures for maintaining rosters. 3. Description of housing, facilities, and equipment. 4. Procedures for revising the capability list and conducting a self-evaluation, audit. 5. Procedures for revising the training program. 6. Procedures governing work done at another location. 7. Procedures for working on air carrier aircraft. 8. Description of the required records and record keeping. 9. Procedures for revising the repair station.
I want you to get your
manual.
degree. So we
10.
built our
Description of the
program,
system to identify and
all
control
18
the
months of it
sections
that
of
you
the
go to
manual.
school to get your
All
AMT
records for
certificate.
repair station
You're also
maintenance
getting
activity
everything
must
you
be
need
kept
to
a
get your
minimum of 2
AAS.
years. Domestic repair station certificates are effective until they are surrendered, suspended, or revoked. The certificates of foreign repair stations expire, usually after 1 or 2 years, and must be renewed. 14 CFR Part 147 Aviation Maintenance Technician Schools. Title 14 CFR Part 147 defines the requirements for obtaining a maintenance training certificate. This certificate may be for either airframe, power plant, or a combination of the two. The minimum number of curriculum hours for conducting either airframe or power plant training independently is 1,150. If both NP ratings are offered, the combined total curriculum hours are 1,900. This is because of the 1,150 hours specified to obtain either the airframe or the power plant rating. 400 hours are devoted to general studies. Only one set of general studies hours is applicable to the combined total. Therefore, 400 hours can be subtracted from the implied total of 2,300 hours, 1150 by 2, to obtain the reduced figure of 1,900 hours. Requirements are detailed as follows. 1. Appendix A, Curriculum Requirements. 2. Appendix B, General Curriculum Subjects. 3. Appendix C, Airframe Curricular Subjects. 4. Appendix D, Power Plant Curriculum Subjects. 14 CFR Part 183, Representatives of the Administrator. As the aviation industry grows and the design, manufacture, and testing of aircraft gets more complex, the FAA faces both budget constraints and personnel shortages. As early as 1962, the FAA began a program to allow private sector persons in various areas of industry to be designees or representatives of the FAA administrator. These people are not FAA employees, but rather are designated by the FAA to act on their behalf. Regular doctors may serve as aviation medical examiners, skilled pilots can become pilot examiners, and experienced airframe and/or power plant mechanics can become designated mechanic examiners, DME, to administer the oral and practical portion of the FAA testing. Other lesser-known designees are the designated engineering representatives, DR, the designated manufacturing inspection representatives, DMIR, and the designated airworthiness representatives, DAR. End of page 2 to 13. 1. DERs approve data based upon their engineering training and their knowledge of FAA regulations. 2. DMIRs make conformity inspections only at their employer. They are similar to designated repairmen because they are only authorized to inspect parts at their employer's facility. 3. DARs conduct aircraft certification and aircraft inspection functions on behalf of the FAA depending on specific functions they are authorized. They may perform work for either manufacturing facilities or maintenance entities depending on their designation. Explanation of primary regulations, Parts 43 and 91. 14 CFR Part 43 Maintenance, Preventative Maintenance Rebuilding, and Alteration Section 43.1 Applicability. Paragraph A states quite clearly that aircraft, whether U.S. or foreign registered operating under 14 CFR Part 121 or 135, and component parts thereof must be maintained in accordance with the rules set forth in this part. Although paragraph B states quite clearly the type of aircraft that this part does not apply to, it seems to have led to considerable confusion within the aviation industry. If an aircraft is flying with a Special Airworthiness Experimental Certificate, FAA Form 8130-7, Special Airworthiness Certificate, Pink Color Certificate, and that is the only airworthiness certificate this aircraft has ever had, then 14 CFR Part 43 does not apply. Conversely, sometimes during maintenance, especially STC modification, the STC is addressed later in this chapter, it becomes necessary to temporarily place the aircraft into Special Airworthiness Experimental. This is done to show compliance with federal regulations. These aircraft must still be maintained in accordance with 14 CFR Part 43, because the aircraft had a different kind of airworthiness, in this example a standard, prior to being issued the Special Airworthiness Certificate. Section 43.2 Records of Overhaul and Rebuilding. These terms are not defined in 14 CFR Part 1 and are given full explanation in this subpart. Each term states that it may not be used to describe work done on an aircraft, airframe, aircraft engine, propeller, appliance, or component part unless that item has been 1. Disassembled. 2. Cleaned. 3. Inspected. 4. Repaired, as necessary. 5. Reassembled. 6. Tested. The key difference between the two terms is in determining how the item is tested. If it is tested in accordance with approved standards acceptable to the administration that have been developed and documented by the manufacturer, the item is said to be overhauled. This is basically another way of describing service limits, a term frequently used to describe manufacturer-specified acceptable limits for used parts. A rebuilt item, on the other hand, must be tested to the same tolerances and limits as a new item. Section 43.3 Persons authorized to perform maintenance, preventive maintenance, rebuilding, and alterations. There are 9 different persons who may perform maintenance. Reminder, per 14 CFR Part 1, the FAA definition of a person is an individual, firm, partnership, corporation, association, joint stock association, or governmental entity. It includes a trustee, receiver, assignee, or similar representative of any of them. 1. Certificated mechanic, per 14 CFR Part 65. 2. Certificated repairman, per 14 CFR Part 65. 3. Person working under the supervision of a certificated mechanic or repairman. 4. Holder of repair station certificate. 5. Holder of an air carrier certificate. 6. Except for holders of a sport pilot certificate, the holder of a pilot certificate issued under Part 61 may perform preventive maintenance on any aircraft owned or operated by that pilot which is not used under 14 CFR Part 121, 129, or 135. The holder of a sport pilot certificate may perform preventive maintenance on an aircraft owned or operated by that pilot and issued a special airworthiness certificate in the light sport category. 7. Pilot of a helicopter, when operated under 14 CFR Part 135 and in remote areas, may perform specific preventive maintenance actions. These actions may only be accomplished under the following conditions. 1. The mechanical difficulty or malfunction occurred en route to or in the remote area. 2. The pilot has been satisfactorily trained and is authorized in writing by the certificate holder to perform the required maintenance. End of page 2 to 14.